Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. I'm Christina Diaz-Bazito. I'm the Senior Director of Sponsorship here at the James Beard Foundation, and I'm so excited to welcome you all here this morning for our chat on the future of restaurant technology. We have a couple of special guests with us this morning. This event is in partnership with BentoBox, who is the official restaurant technology partner of the James Beard Foundation. Great partner for us. We've been in partnership for about 2 years now, and this partnership really enables us to support some of our programmatic work, like the events here today, and really focus on events that can help the industry, take the next step. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this morning. Krystle Mobayeni is the founder of BentoBox and the head of restaurants at Fiserv. She founded BentoBox in 2013 after working with restaurants as a web designer, where she observed that existing technology drove a wedge between restaurants and their guests. She built BentoBox to empower modern restaurants to build their online presence, diversify revenue, engage with diners, and increase operational efficiency. Under her leadership, BentoBox was acquired by Fiserv in November of 2021. Kelly MacPherson is the Chief Technology and Supply Chain Officer at Union Square Hospitality Group. She's responsible for creating and executing technology strategy. She has over 20 years of experience leading and advising technology teams and companies such as Abercrombie & Fitch and Hard Rock Cafe. And most recently, she served as the Chief Information Officer for Restaurant Brands International. So with that, I'd love to welcome the two of you for this engaging chat on restaurant technology. So thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here, and we were joking, when we were prepping for this, that this is a conversation that Kelly and I are having regularly, multiple times a month, and it's just the conversation that we always have, and just having it much more publicly, and it's something we're both really, really passionate about. And I think the place that I would start is talking about the role of technology as it relates to the diner experience, and how, Christina just talked about how when BentoBox was started, it was about technology was creating a wedge between restaurants and their diners. And today, I think there are so many really innovative ways that technology can actually facilitate the diner experience instead of coming between it, and help create a more custom and personalized diner experience in the dining room and outside the dining room. And it's something that we're really, really passionate about. So I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of how are you seeing that play out, and how are you thinking about that in moving forward, the role technology plays in the diner experience?
Yeah, and first, great to be here. Thank you for having us. And like Krystle talked about, we talk about this almost every week, and we've been talking about it for the last few years since we were introduced. And for us, it's really about, when I look at it, is how do you create technology as the enablement of that dining experience, right? And we will always start first and foremost with not replacing the human connection, right? And the emotional feel of the dining experience. And so my teams hear me talk a lot about how do we take the art of what we do in the restaurants and what the teams do every day to deliver those experiences, and marry it with the science of technology to create an even elevated enlightened hospitality experience. And so when we look at the dining experience, and I think it's really important, is to looking at it from the start, right, the discovery. When somebody wants to go and figure out where they're going to go dine, and how that discovery plays out to then when they enter the front door, and they have that first kind of interaction with, the host or the maitre d' at the front door, throughout the dining experience, breaking it down of where technology can play a role. And then I think most recently, and where we believe we can have the biggest impact, and probably jump in, and where Krystle and I are very passionate about, is how do you impact the exit part of the dining experience? And so we've been working on that probably for the last couple of years, of how do you create a much more frictionless experience when you're leaving the restaurant, right? And so for those of you know, that last 15 that last experience is generally trying to find a check, right? You're doing this, you're doing all these different signs, you're trying to be done, and when you're done, you want to be done. And so looking at that entire exit experience and where technology can come to play in that. And so maybe I'll turn it back over to you to talk about some of the things that we've been working on, but we believe that it can have an impact on the experience, but can also drive revenue in terms of optimizing kind of your turns within the restaurant as well, if you can get much more efficient on that last piece of the dining experience.
Yeah, and I think the reason that we at BentoBox were thinking about how we can help drive this new in-dining experience is that BentoBox has like inherently been digital first, and online first. And I think that there is a lot of ways, if you're starting with the discovery and pre-dining experience where BentoBox has, historically played like a really big role, how can we, get that diner's, party information, their payment information at that moment, and store it in a digital way so that when they're in the dining experience, both we can use that data, and we'll get to talking about data because that's like a huge big topic, but how can we then leverage that digitally stored information that's like tied to a diner to then enhance the dining experience, and specifically that moment when you want to leave. We did some diner surveys, and that part of the dining experience is one that creates a lot of friction for diners. And then it also, like, if you think about like people like hospitality staff, like restaurant staff, like it's kind of admin, you know what I mean? It's not the moments where they're really like providing that great service. It's like, you gotta get a piece of paper, deliver it, run it, So how do we eliminate that admin for the restaurant staff so that when the diner's ready to go, they can just do that, and you don't have to like spend that last 15 minutes that always like gets you annoyed before you want to go catch that show or something. And then the staff also can just focus on like delivering hospitality.
And I think in that friction point, and I think a topic that we'll talk about, not to keep kind of pushing things down the line, but I think in that dining experience and through COVID, with the really push in contactless payment, right? And so you look at bringing devices to the table to kind of end that last transaction. And so now you're starting to see anxiety from consumers on tipping, right? Because you're not leaving the check walking away, and the consumer and the diner has the freedom to add a tip on the check.
Yeah.
Now somebody's standing over them, right or wrong, with this device. You can leave the device and walk away, but for some reason there's this attachment that I have to keep the device in hand or watch you actually do it.
Yeah.
And so the servers are looking over the shoulder of diners while they're tipping, and it's creating a new friction point. And so I think by really looking at that exit experience and how we can use technology to make that as frictionless as possible and take that pressure off, I think is going to be an advantage. And I think the other part of the exit experience too that we talk about is not just payment, but things like code check, things like getting an Uber or getting a taxi or valet of you're fumbling around at the end of the night trying to find your code check tag. And so if I can streamline that process as well, so it's fully automated through the digital piece, and how great it is if you're going to walk up at the end of the night and your coat's ready for you, or your car's already at valet and you're not having to do one more thing to do it. And so I think we look at not just payment, but the totality of exiting the restaurant.
Yeah, I like that valet example because I think in New York we forget about that because we're, but like people are like parking their cars like everywhere else in the country.
It's a very big thing in Miami.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example where you can just like, just anticipate the needs. The person's leaving, you got their coat, you got their car. It's perfect, And well, on tipping though, like, do you think that having technology facilitate parts of the dining experience is going to, lead to people tipping less?
I don't think it's going to lead to people tipping less. I think it's going to take away the anxiety and let people focus on the actual experience as opposed to this pressure of, we've all seen it, if you default, there's the capabilities of now defaulting a number. There's the ranges are getting big. I got prompted for a tip at a grocery store, like not too long ago, because the technology just has it and people don't know how to turn it off. And so I think it's a conversation that's going to continue. But the more we can go back to letting, like, the staff deliver the service and the experience. I think will ease some of the pressure, and people won't tip less.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I agree. I think it's all about what is the lasting impression that someone has of their experience, and tipping on that is what's most important. So I don't think that it would take away from it. If anything, I think it would only enhance it, And with Bento, I think one thing, we've talked about and we're thinking about is obviously BentoBox is not a POS, and but the POS plays such an important role in that central dining experience. And so when we're thinking about more of a digital first experience, we're trying to figure out, well, how do we do that without having to do all these POS integrations, which which we all know never work exactly how we want, and are really complicated to manage. And there's so many different POSs. Obviously, there's a few leaders, but so what we're thinking about what role does the POS play, in this experience? Is it the engine of this whole experience, the way the POS has been the center in the past, or can it take a lot more of a back seat, and it's much more, the power of the POS is much more about commerce, and it's not where everything is. And there's this idea of more agnostic, centralized platforms that actually power that experience. And that's something that, we're working on and thinking a lot about in 2024.
And I think we talk a lot about commerce, right? And I do believe the POS really becomes the commerce engine within the restaurant. And it's really, not to offend any POS providers, but that really becomes the commodity of what you do. It's processing the transaction, and it's really leading into the data and what you can do with the information that's coming both in and out of the point of sale. So when you look at it, and you brought up the phrase earlier about anticipating needs, right? And so if you start to look at where technology is going to have that influence on the experience, we really talk about anticipatory hospitality, right? And so how can you be one step ahead of really understanding and how to create moments for individuals? And it's a one-to-one relationship when people come into the restaurant. And the way you're going to do that is through the power of the data that you have and that you collect. And then tools like machine learning and AI can help you kind of surface up that information. And so I think that's a lot about what we've been talking about and worrying about. So the POS will be the one that'll process the transaction and do those types of things. But kind of the layer above that of kind of bringing it to light of, you think about retailing, you think about clienteling, you think about those different concepts and bringing those into the restaurants. And so if you can imagine, we talk about the role of the sommelier, very important, right? And you're never going to replace that expertise. But just think about if you can prep with the diners and the reservations that you have coming in, and they can tailor an experience based on the preference of knowing who the guests are, what they've had for wine before. And if I can walk up and start a conversation with maybe 2 bottles of wine, and you have a curated experience for them before they come in, as opposed to dropping a wine book, still do that experience, but having a conversation and having that kind of intimate one-on-one based on preferences and likes. And so again, all that's going to come through the data that you harvest through the past dining experiences.
Yeah, and it's not a foreign concept. I mean, people have done this with regulars constantly, and so you're just you're allowing that to happen a little bit more at scale, which everyone loves, so it's a more memorable experience. And I think it's really a win-win. It's not really taking anything away. So and then so you need that data, obviously, and the data's a big kind of scary thing, I think, for a lot of restaurants. And we talk about how the problem with that is the reason that's happened is because most restaurants don't know what to do with the data. And I'm always so impressed by the level of sophistication that you guys at USHG are operating with in terms of how you're leveraging that data already. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so throughout passionate about data, right? But I think it's looking at it in different ways, and I think the accessibility of data has gotten better, and the tools out there to really understand and do the reporting, right? And so I've been doing this for a long time. I've been, started my career actually running restaurants, and it's always about two things. It's about driving sales and managing your costs, and that hasn't changed in 4 decades that I've been doing, 3 or 4 decades. I won't date myself. Understanding a P&L, right? Early in the days, generating that P&L was probably the greatest lift that you had to do, and now you've got the automation of being able to do that. But data needs, and we look at it as data needs to tell a story. And anybody that's run a restaurant, by now people should know how to read a point of sale, or a P&L. Green, your sales are up. Red, your sales are down. Like, we all get that. We can read it. What happened? Very, very clear to get that information today. Then it's taken to the next level is understanding why it happened. And that's where I think some of the tools have advanced. And so looking at it is, why are my sales up? Why are my sales down? Why am I running over on labor? Why am I not selling this product? And starting to kind of harness that information, which is important. But the most important part of that storytelling comes next. And we talk about it in why, what, and what do I do about it? Right? And so that's the part that I think is the most difficult for restaurants, because you have all this information, probably have a good sense of why things are happening, but now for managers, what's the next step to do about that? And that's the part that I'm really excited about, of where kind of the evolution of technology and AI and machine learning can help, because as opposed to looking through pages of reports or, dashboards, I mean, we keep creating dashboards with the same information and thinking a different visual is going to create a different behavior. Yeah. And so it's really about, how can I just take out all the nuggets that somebody needs every single day? And that's what my teams are building, to say, go focus on these 3 things today, and keep it very prescriptive, as opposed to somebody having to kind of dig and go through a whole bunch of data to figure out what's happening. And I think that's where the advancements of technology is going to help from an operations perspective. Because in the end of the day, for us, it's all about getting managers out of the back office, out of processing information, out of manual tasks, and doing what they do best, and that's interacting with the teams and the guests. Yeah.
And we're at Bento, we've been thinking a lot about that, as we're thinking of BentoBox as much more of like a platform versus like just websites, and how do we leverage the data that we have to provide these insights to like restaurant owners about like, okay, well, what now? But much more from a diner perspective. And one thing that I always think about, or we always think about, is every restaurant's they have a unique hospitality experience. They have the way they operate. Every restaurant is so like unique in that sense. And this isn't really a question, but just something like we're working through, is like, can you provide insights at scale through AI and machine learning, that a restaurant that doesn't have like the level of sophistication in the teams that you guys have, and they don't all have a Kelly, working there, can we help like automate those insights to answer the like why, and like, okay, what do you do with it? I don't know. We're gonna try it, and I hope we can. But that's it would be great to empower restaurants to be able to do that without having to, build these massive like technology teams, So.
And I think the tools are getting better to do that. And I think it's also looking at how people digest information. And so some of the things we're looking at is, not to pick on dashboards for anybody that loves dashboards. We've been doing them for the last, decades, right? And so is there a better means of delivery of that information? And so you think about, again, going back to storytelling, and where generative AI can help tell those stories. And so my best example is, anybody plays fantasy football, and I talk about this example. If you look at a league recap on a Monday morning, and it's like entertaining, and it tells you highlights, and it tells you like where you went wrong on picking your team, and if you only did this. And so, can you make information and reporting like in that digestible kind of format of more of a narrative? You still have to have the the charts and the trends and all those other things.
Yeah.
And so looking at that, and then we're also looking at audio. And so if I'm commuting, if I'm, taking the train in the morning, what if I get my delivery of my sales report, and more importantly, the things to focus on in a small 2-minute podcast every morning? That's how people are learning, and so can we change the way the delivery of the reporting comes to? And I think thinking outside the box and the tools and the technologies that we're seeing today, again, going back to generative AI, are going to enable those types of things. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I love that podcast example, because that's really how those in the industry consume. They're prepping and they're consuming information via audio, and I think that's really smart. So unlike the sales side, the sales data, that makes a lot of sense that every restaurant kind of owns that data. I think it gets a little trickier with diner information, because restaurants have so many different channels, and there's a baseline, of diner information that you can own, but I think there's also these different providers that own that data, and we and I operate in a way that data is going to over time become more owned. I don't know, do you think that as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think owning that data is the key to really understanding that experience all the way and controlling the experience from discovery all the way through that exit phase of the dining experience. And without owning your own customer data, it's very difficult to kind of intercept between each one of those phases of the experience.
Yeah. Do we think, and I have an opinion on this, that marketplaces then go away or become less important? Because that's where the data gets stuck at times, right?
I think there's ways to harness that data. I don't know if they go away, but I think it's one of those, I think it's really important that you meet the customer where they're at. And so I think you have to be on those marketplaces, right?
Yeah.
In most situations.
Yeah.
And so figuring out how and what data you can harness out of that as you come through the experience, right?
Yeah. And I think the way I and we think about it is the evolution. Again, I think that some of this has happened in travel, where they're just channels, they're not the platforms, anymore. And I think that shift, and I think that restaurant groups that are very much leading the industry, like USHG and others, need to really be spearheading that for the industry, where they can have ownership of that data, so that they can create a better experience. It doesn't help anybody if that information is locked away in a reservation or online ordering platform that you have no access to it. It doesn't help anyone, because I barely even think it helps the marketplaces, because I don't think they're even really leveraging it in the right or best ways, So yeah, I think data ownership, I hope that we're moving in the right direction. And I think with Google and stuff, we are.
I think we are. And I think you said it, I think you start to see this channel strategy, and again, mirroring the travel industry of how some of the big travel brands operate. And when you had Expedia and the Orbitz and these other platforms that came on, a lot of the big brands went back into their own reservation and booking engines, but you couldn't just stop using those, because again, it's meeting the guests where they're at.
Yeah.
Same for third-party delivery platforms.
Yeah. And on the topic of, I think I had one last thing on data. Do you think that the data inherently should be part of the POS platform, or you see it in that higher level platform layer that sits above a POS, so it becomes much more about the POS is much more commerce. And then what else do you think gets stripped out of the POS?
I think when
it could.
Yeah,
could.
I have a lot of viewpoints on point of sale. We could talk for hours on this. Again, I look at POS in obviously the heart of the restaurant is the teams. And so caveat that. When you look at the heart of the tech stack, it's the point of sale. Because when I say that, because it's pumping the blood or the data in and out. And so you have to have the flexibility of injecting data into the point of sale, and you have to be able to get the data out of it. And so I think creating that layer above, I'm a big proponent of, which is interesting because the industry is kind of leaning another way, and this topic has swung back and forth for the last decades of all-in-one versus kind of best of breed when you start to look at point of sale and platforms out there. And I think people sometimes confuse point of sale with all the other management tools within the restaurant, labor, inventory, reporting. And so in my viewpoint, I prefer having more of a modular approach, because when you start to look at scale and you look back at some of the companies that I work with, to change out a point of sale is very difficult. Like, nobody likes to do it. It's expensive, it takes time, and you're not adding a lot. But if it's coupled with inventory management, labor scheduling, reporting, you're going to be less apt to replace it at any certain pace because of the cost or the time.
Yeah.
And so getting kind of best of breed and taking advantage of the advancements in technologies in these different areas, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And gives you more flexibility as you grow from a tech stack perspective.
Yeah.
And point of sale just continues to be that core of transaction processing, getting orders to the kitchen in the most effective way.
Yeah, it's the revenue.
And it's the revenue.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it makes sense that it's like has become like the engine, because it's like the lifeline, for the restaurant.
And I think the question now is, you have point of sale and you have digital ordering, and they're both commerce platforms.
Yeah.
When do they merge into one?
Oh, yeah, totally.
And do you need both, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about commerce, that's where the intersection comes.
Yeah.
And to be honest, would start to simplify a lot of the integrations and a lot of the complexity that happens today.
Yeah.
As we've gone into this omni-channel, kind of outside the four wall of the brick and mortar of the restaurant.
Yeah, that has to happen. And we've talked a lot at BentoBox about this idea of like, it is our responsibility as technology companies to make sure that we have these integrations, and if we are, as an industry, as a technology industry, being resistant to that, like, we're only hurting our customers, and then we're hurting ourselves, So those walls need to come down. And there's always been kind of like, okay, well, what do we spend our time on? Do we spend our time on like, integrations, or like continuing to build our own product? And one thing that we're going to be doing over the next year is making Bento a much more open platform, so that like the onus isn't just on us to build those integrations, that the other companies can build to us. And I think that's going to be really important in unlocking and kind of like practicing what we preach, because even though we're like want to be very open and help the industry come together, we're not really providing the rest of the technology industry a good way to do that. So, but I do think it's really important to, and it's a little disheartening when you see technology companies being so cagey, Why do you think that happens? Like, it's so silly to me.
I don't know what happens.
Yeah.
So that's a great. No, I mean, I think it's hard because they're competing on revenue, and if you're a public company, you're trying to drive share, right? And you're trying to create more revenue streams. I think back when technology wasn't as advanced, before kind of cloud and modern architectures, it was harder. To do an integration between two different companies back in the old days could take like 3 to 6 months, and it was just very laborious. Today, there's no excuse, because it's just common API,
Totally.
So it's a willingness. But I think you're finding, especially as you're starting to see consolidation in the industry, people are learning, and I know there's a term, but I'm not going to come up. It escapes me, but competitors are going to have to play nice together.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing so much consolidation, and there's so much overlap of capabilities between all the big providers today, that it's going to force cooperation. And I think COVID forced a lot of that cooperation as well too. Because with kind of extending into omni-channel, people had to learn how to play nice because the market was demanding it, and I think that'll just continue.
Yeah, and we always use retail and hotel as kind of examples of where things are going for a restaurant, and I think those are very integration-driven industries, and they thrive because of that. So hopefully we'll get there soon. Should we move to questions, or I don't know where we're at with timing, but
okay, we can do a question.
Yeah.
How do you see AI playing a role in menuing and decision making on menuing?
AI, we don't quite know where it's going to land yet, right? When you start to look at it, I think that everybody's talking about it, but the practical terms of it, where I think the first start and the biggest impact is going to come on is content generation. Mm-hmm. And so when you start to look at how can you start to look at kind of facilitating posts, right?
Yeah.
Like social media posts or descriptions of menu, and some of those things that just take a long time is where I see it coming into play.
I can add to that, because I don't think this was your question, which is why I didn't jump in, but a few ways that we're using AI in Bento when it comes to menus, and we're going to roll it out in the next couple of months. It was actually a hackathon project that became a real one, but if there is a menu item and we have information of the restaurant in the website CMS, because that we're storing that, what the price points are, where it's located, what type of casual or fine dining, whatever it is, can, based on the image and the title, can it then generate the description that's going to be front facing for the diner, and then also taking the image, because for search, metadata on an image is really important. Can it then also generate the metadata that gets stored in the code for the search engines? And then the other thing, which is a little controversial, but photography is such a big pain point for smaller, more independent restaurants. Can it take the description and then generate the image of that item? And of course, I get the issues with that, but these the websites are so image driven, and if you don't have I think it's better than an iPhone image that's blurry and not appetizing.
And I see that as content, because I think your question was also, is AI going to generate the menu item?
Yeah.
I still believe there's an art to that, right? And I think that's where the art and science come into play. And so I'm sure there's some capability. I know the because I asked it a recipe on something the other day. It's there, but that's where I would want the chefs to continue to drive the art of what they do, right?
Yeah. How do you think security concerns play a role in terms of harvesting and utilizing all this data?
There's always needs to be a consent and an opt-in, So I think, and I know that when people opt into things, they don't really know what they're always opting into. But so I think from that perspective, there needs to be just a really thoughtful way of doing that. And we need to have really tight technology platforms where we there's no concern about leakage and things like that. And what I would say about BentoBox being acquired by Fiserv, one thing that we complain about all day long, but is creates a much more secure environment. They're a financial services company, so it's highly regulated. So our platform is just being tested for cyber, just security constantly, So I think that level of testing needs to happen. So people's data isn't just out in the open. So I think that it's a lot on the technology company's responsibility to be able to do that in the right way. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think it's security always has to be top of mind, especially coming on the brand tech side, right? And making sure that you continue to invest in the tools and technology to protect that information, right? And then working with partners that have robust security measures in place as well too. And I think the advancements in things like AI are helping some of that perimeter external monitoring as well, to help thwart off attempts. Sitting on the brand side, it's I think it's fair to say it's generally for people not a question of if, but when, because if somebody truly wants to do something destructive, they can figure, it's going to happen, right? It's about how much kind of preventative are you doing, and then making sure that you have really robust measures in place to respond to that, right? But it's what keeps me up every day. I mean, it's top of mind, right? And that's my job to worry about that, and my team's job to make sure that we protect both. I mean, I think it's external customer data, but it's also internal employee information as well too.
Yeah.
And so when IT sends out those crazy phishing tests and all those things, there's reasons for it, right? And it's super important, because most breaches are going to happen because of a failure on a process or a human. I mean, I think there was a large casino in Vegas that just experienced this, right? And it's catastrophic when it happens.
Yeah, and I think that reputationally, I think it's so top of mind, because you kind of get one chance, you know? And if you like lose people's trust, your customers' trust, like that's kind of it. So I think it's a real scary kind of situation, and really top of mind for that reason.
So I think all of us here know that staffing turnover is a huge issue in the restaurant industry. Checked the stats recently, it's 80% over the last 10 years annually. So I'm curious what your opinion is on how technology in the future may help to address that problem of staffing and employer-employee relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I mean, I think it probably goes beyond the 10 years. I think this has been a long term. And I think the gig economy hasn't helped as well. For us at USHG, first and foremost, the employees are our first focus, right? And so I think equally as important of creating a great tech strategy for the guest experience, we start first and foremost with the employee experience, right? And looking at things like creating a friction experience all the way from, again, discovery of when you're searching for a job, all the way through your retirement from a company. I think it used to be hire to fire, but it's much nicer to say hire to retire. But that experience and how do you create moments that's not friction? And so if you start to look at it, kind of a principle is technology within the restaurants, it should be invisible, not invasive. And if you're creating friction points for your teams to do their jobs, it's the same frustration as a guest trying to have a dining experience. And so looking at way technology can help through that process, I think it's just onboarding and kind of the paperwork stuff, making that frictionless. I think it's interacting with the tools and technology that you can to help aid them in their jobs. I think training technologies have come a long way. I think looking at things like clocking in and out, we can do it, taking a very mobile approach first to that, where they control the power within their own phones and being able to swap schedules and look at things from an app perspective. I think you're starting to see a big trend, and a lot of people are doing it, but looking at how you pay. And so the concepts of same-day pay or next-day pay and making funds available to them sooner, like those are things that you can do to continue to improve that employee experience. And then performance and ratings and review and feedback, I think is really important, is our technologies that have advanced as well too to help that entire employee experience.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I really liked when you were talking about harnessing the why a little bit, like using data. With data, you can very quickly understand like sales went down, but labor costs went up, but actually like going a level deeper and understanding maybe what happened at a specific store, or just being able to use the data to dive in a layer deeper and tell more of a story. Are there specific modules or things that you guys are doing to actually leverage that and like dive into that? I feel like that would be so helpful for restaurateurs.
Yeah. Well, on the BentoBox side, as we're thinking about more of a platform approach, and we have different modules that all contribute to that, from like e-commerce to website content to like diner profile information. We started building in marketing automation, like email campaigns and things like that. And so how do you first take the information about what's happening through e-commerce, for example, if you're selling more gift cards, or you're getting more catering events happening, and then how do you then so that's what happened, and then why it happened. Did you send out a campaign? Is there search engine terms that you're starting to rank for? Is that information coming from a press article? We can help put all that together, and then what do you do about it? Take those diners that came in and then send them an email automatically. Of course, the restaurant will say yes, but without them having to do anything, how do you then send out a campaign that then responds to the what and the why? So that's one thing that's actually happening now-ish that we're doing. But I think that there's so many applications of this, especially as we think about the end-to-end experience, and what we were talking about before of the more effortless diner experience that's more digitally driven. So I don't know if you had any.
Yeah, I think there's also, if you look at it, there's technologies out there that you can leverage. I mean, we consciously made an investment in building an analytics, very small but mighty analytics team. We set up a data lake in AWS and layered, there's some tools out there that you can inexpensively layer on top of that. But we also hired a data scientist, and I can tell you, when I first went to the team and said, hey, I want this new role, I want to hire a data scientist, everybody looked at me like I was crazy. But it's impactful, right? And it's making sure that person or that team has the connection with the operators to help guide them through those analytics, right? And so being able to generate automatically the baseline reporting, the stuff that we're all used to getting through the tools of the technology, but then somebody to really help them dig in and understand the why and the what next has paid dividends since we've kind of formalized that team.
Yeah.
Who internally at a restaurant company should own the data and leverage insights from the data, especially if you're a 5, 10, 15 unit concept that maybe doesn't have a sophisticated team, but want to leverage all the insights you can?
I think it's hard because it could vary from a structure. And so wearing my tech and then supply chain, it's the entire leadership team should own that, right? Because the data is going to help every area of the business. In our organization, I took it on probably because of my past experience at RBI and scale of bringing that in. But I look at it as that team then becomes partners to everybody else, right? And so they become a service organization to the HR team to look at turnover numbers and some of those other things, marketing, and kind of being that kind of shared service group around. And so I would worry less about where the structure comes from, but where the focus and the impact is. When we first hired the team, the request, and the other thing I think is really important is looking at kind of magnitude of what you're looking at. And so when we first brought the person on, we went out and said, okay, what are we missing in terms of what would help you drive your business forward? And I started to look at the list, and one of the items on the list was, well, we'd really like to understand large parties on Tuesday nights and the impact. And great question to ask, and we want people to be curious, but is that really what's going to drive the needle of the business, right? And so I think having the kind of that filter of people are naturally curious, and you never want to take that curiosity away. And I think it's one of the most important traits to have, right? Always asking the questions of why, what's happening. But just doing it at a level that is actually going to move the needle, and having somebody that can help kind of prioritize some of those requests coming in is where I think then allows the data scientists and the analytics team to have the biggest impact.
I think that restaurants right now have a lot of technology partners, and I think that there is probably, I'm speaking for ourselves, but I also see this in our peers. There's probably a willingness to work very closely with, the person at the restaurant to help arm them with the information and data to help bring that to their teams to then be able to expand their capabilities. They would probably do it selfishly in thinking that there would be you would want to expand with that technology provider, but I think a lot of technology providers who have that data could help restaurants build cases for creating these teams and having them invest more. So I think it's it's an interesting angle to try, and I know that in the BentoBox world, the customer success managers they love partnering with our clients and customers in this way. So I think it's an interesting route to check out.
And I think there's also companies out there. I mean, we use one called Ingest AI. And I look at the hardest part sometimes is the actual transformation and consolidation of the data. And so if you could take that lift off and have somebody that has all those kind of pre-built integrations to all these different restaurant tech platforms and being able to do that kind of normalization of the data, which gets really important to have, and making sure that you have it available somewhere, then you can focus up the time to really start to bring in the analytics side of what you're doing. And so looking at partners that have done that and do it well is taking off that heavy lift is important.
Yeah.
Krystle, you mentioned that restaurants have a lot of technology partners.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier you mentioned as well that sometimes, especially in the SMB segment, which makes up a significant portion of the industry, they might not have access to those kinds of partners. And it brings me to Kelly's point about how she has a lot of thoughts on the POS.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, the POS is the very first partner that they establish. Kelly, do you see an evolution in technology for an opportunity to have a restaurant operate without a POS at all?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because I translate POS to commerce, and you can't not have commerce. You still need to be able to generate that transaction. I think what we call it is going to change. I also think there's this sometimes, and having come from the franchisee world at scale, is there's sometimes people associate hardware to point of sale, and I think separating those two out are important. And I think the hardware, again, has become, in way back when POS was out, a POS terminal was expensive, right? And you put this capital investment, and I am going to get 10 years out of this if it kills me, right? And it's this big, and it sits on a counter. I think the point of sale has changed where the hardware has become more commoditized as well. And so I think it's commerce. And the way I look at it is commerce and then looking at your presentation layer. And so if you start to look at it I have a different kind of interface for a server that's different than a bartender, which point of sale does today with the different screens. But I can use that same platform for a kiosk. I can use that same platform for online ordering, and so it all funnels back into that transaction engine, because the most difficult part of all that on the integrations really becomes the content management part of that. And I think that's where Bento and some people are helping out so much, because when you add an item, you want it to kind of go everywhere, not having to make sure that everything's in sync. And is it going to my digital menu board? Is it going to my exterior digital menu board? And so creating that central engine and with that content management layer on top of it is where the industry has been going, right? And all the big providers are headed that way as well too. And so I talk a lot about no point of sale, but it's no POS, but it's shifting a mindset to commerce.
So I'm actually going through the process of kind of trying to find an HRIS system for our 2-location restaurant group. The struggle, I think, is finding one that really understands restaurants. Mm-hmm. And that it's seamless when we have our tip pool and all of the different labor laws. We have one restaurant here in New York and another in DC, so totally different labor laws that we have to take into account as well. I'd love to hear how you feel like USHG caters to restaurants and sort of how they have grown to, support what restaurants' unique needs are. And also, you mentioned earlier that kind of an all-in-one solution versus picking the best of each part, scheduling, payroll, whatever it may be. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about, where you see the pros and cons are and kind of going with an all-in-one versus piecing it out.
Yeah, and when I say all-in-one, there's things that you can buy, like you can split apart, right? And so labor scheduling and POS, I think, two things that can split apart. As much as you can consolidate in that employee experience, and I look at it as HRS is really kind of your employee master, your payroll, benefits, kind of that administrative part. I think there's some good platforms out there that do that. We're bigger, so we use more of an enterprise payroll system for that. But partners like we use 7 shifts from a scheduling perspective, clocking in and out, and then they have payroll integrations to some of the ADPs, all the other kind of companies that you can use. And so I think like that's a great option. And looking for partners that can help you from that onboarding all the way through clocking in and out, tip pooling, tip disbursement. And then the payroll side is then what you can go, there's a lot of good platforms out there, and just making sure that there's a strong integration for those. I'm a big believer the more you can outsource on payroll processing, the better, because it's probably not a core competency that you want to bring in-house. And so what tools can help you get to an outsourced payroll provider, especially when you're smaller, right? Hopefully that helps.
About staffing, based off of that, you're talking a lot about payroll and scheduling, clocking in. What about the step before that? What do you see for, how is it now? What do you see the future of like intaking applications and tracking those applications and trailing and interviewing? Seems a little slower than I imagine it should be.
I think there's been a lot of great advancements. I think when you start to look at applicant tracking systems or way to apply, I think you're seeing a big push on video, right? Online integrations. I think there's some great advancements from an AI perspective of some companies I've seen out there that can go through screenings pretty quickly, and text, like you see a lot of hiring happening over text these in the early stages to like schedule to get to the interview. I still think interviewing is an art. And I think when you're looking at both cultural and technical skills, there's still a human connection on some of that selection that still needs to happen. And so if you can ease that experience getting up to that hiring piece, I think technology's come a long way from that side of it. And I think trails, I think, are really important as well too, because I think hiring is a two-way street. It's a two-way it's are you a fit for the company, but also am I a fit for the company? And I think just being in the restaurant and seeing it is a great way to get a good sense of that.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on AI's impact maybe on the guest experience and how maybe it could remove some of those friction points you mentioned earlier.
AI, machine learning with the diner experience, I think it's all about personalization, like being able to connect the dots between what is like, who is this person and what do they care about, and like how does that fit into our unique restaurant steps of service, and how can we optimize that? And that's happening all the time. Like staff is making those decisions, and I think at the best restaurants they're probably getting it right most of the time, and and maybe at other restaurants not so much, and there's so much turnover. So I think that it is kind of a very innovative idea that I don't think anyone is really doing yet, but I think that's where the future is going in terms of like learning the diner, knowing the restaurant, and connecting the dots in a way that like staff could do, and then delivering that to the staff in a way that just eliminates some of the decision making, doesn't eliminate the human connection in that moment where how they deliver that hospitality, but just helps them like enhance that experience. Like I think AI would obviously be failing if it's replacing that. I don't think that we're gonna get it wrong, you know, because it's not gonna be like warm, you know. The person has to deliver that.
And I think there's like natural cases, like, or areas or use cases of, if I have an AI engine that can help with reservations. So if I'm, again, meeting people where they're at, right? If I want to pick up a phone call and call a reservation line, I still have that opportunity to do it. If I want to text and have a conversation over chat, AI can drive that experience, right, in a much more efficient way. And so I think just, again, finding those use cases where it will make sense. You know, the airlines do it really well. If you want to, if I can go on chat and book a flight, I should be able to go on chat and book a restaurant reservation without having to have a human on the other side waiting for that incoming text to come through.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been really informative and interesting. So I've seen a lot of articles in the past 5-7 years about hospitality and restaurant tech, but I feel like it focuses a lot more on just new companies or big personalities. So I'm curious, when it comes to writing about restaurant tech, what do you think the media is missing?
I don't know if it's missing, but again, I think it's just coming back to the core of the human connection and that side of it, and how tech doesn't replace that. It's the enablement to helping restaurants operate more efficiently.
I think that you brought up this point of like big personalities and like new companies, and I think kind of what's happening here. I feel like we don't really or the media doesn't focus enough on like the restaurants, and especially independent. Like you'll hear about it with like the chains, you know, and they're implementing something, and it's just like there's a finite number of them. But like, how are restaurants like peers, you know, leveraging technology? How are they advancing the experience? I don't feel like you hear those case studies enough in the media at just like a smaller, more independent restaurant type of scale.
I think when you look at table service like in QSR, AI is gonna power the drive-through, right? Like that's definitely coming.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your insight, your expertise this morning. As I mentioned, this is part of our series with BentoBox in supporting the industry. So we're working on our next upcoming events. You can check that out at platformbyjbf.org. I think we have posted our programming through February right now, but our event will be on March 25th. We'll be talking about motherhood in the industry with BentoBox. So stay tuned for that.
Cool. Yeah.
And if you feel so inclined, you can sign up for our newsletter to get all updates about more of our industry programming on our website at jamesbeard.org. But thank you again for being here. Please help yourself to more refreshments and beverages, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.